You want to learn as much as possible, as efficiently as possible. That only makes sense. I think we all want to spend as little time as possible practicing and then get the most out of it. At the same time, there are actually some things that are really slowing you down and making you waste some practice time. So in this video, I'm going to go over 5 very common mistakes. This is stuff that I've done myself, that I see with students, and also what comes along in the comments and the emails I get from you guys. But actually, most of these mistakes are things that you can fix if you start thinking a little bit differently about the music that you're trying to learn and how you're planning your practice and what you're focusing on. My name is Larsen. Learn jazz, make music. Modes and chord scale relationships was invented as a method of teaching music and teaching jazz in the late 60s. And if you look at the music that was being made at the time, then it is pretty good for describing that type of music. The problem is that if you're beginning with jazz and if you're busy playing jazz music, then most of the time you're actually not going to be playing that music. You're going to be playing jazz standards, and they are tonal and functional pieces. So it makes a lot more sense to think about the chord progressions as more chords grouped together, instead of just thinking about on this chord I'm thinking this scale and on the next chord I have to think this scale, because it's as much about the relationship between the chords and how the notes are moving. Let's take a look at the most basic progression that we have. So a 2-5-1 in major. Let's do this in C major. So D minor 7 to G7 to C major 7. You can probably hear that this progression has a direction. It's not just a bunch of chords next to each other. It's a progression that is moving forward and wants to resolve. If I play a C6, you can really hear that this is where it's ending. And each of those chords are not only just standing alone, they are part of a progression that is moving from one chord to the next. And this is what is important about not using sort of this modal chord scale relationship idea, because there you're just saying, well, it's a D minor, so I'm just going to play D Dorian on it. And then after that, when I'm done with a D minor, then we get a G7, and then I'm going to play Mixolydian. And then we get a C major, and then I'm going to play Ionian. Because if you're playing like that, then you're not really playing how the progression sounds. The progression is really moving. So you want to play something that understands that that movement is in there as well. And that's how you want to think about it. So you want to think about those progressions in the keys that they're in and understand the harmony like that. And this is also something that you're going to find if you start checking out and listening to solos of the people that came before the modal era, because then you are listening to people that are playing bebop and hard bop, and when they're playing, they're not really playing a chord in that way, they're really playing the movement of the chords. So they're playing on a D minor 7 something that is pointing towards the G7, and then from the G7 playing something that's pointing towards the C major 7. And this forward motion is really a part of how that music works. And that's really just written into a jazz standard. And that's also just a very natural way of playing it. And if you're not taking that into account, then you're kind of missing something. There is a difference between playing D minor, G7, C major, and then playing sort of a random progression like D flat major 7 to E7 to C minor major. Because if you're just looking at those as individual chords, then there's no difference. But if you recognize that one of these progressions is in a key and what key it is in, and that it's moving in a logical way, then you can also improvise over it like that. And the other progression, there's no functional relationship. So the advantage of studying functional harmony over modal harmony for this is that it's going to help you learn how to play from chord to chord. It's going to help you voice lead the chord voicings when you're comping. And it's actually also going to help you understand which chords in a progression, because a lot of songs will have a lot of different chords and some of them are more important than the other ones. And if you have a good understanding of the main movement of what is happening in the song, then you also know which chords you can leave out. So which chords are embellishments and which chords are the important chords that are really giving the color of the song. Learning jazz, you quickly realize that there are a lot of skills involved. There are a lot of things that you need to be able to do and also that you need to know. It's very easy to get lost in all the technical things around it, all the arpeggios and chord voicings and inversions, when you really also want to keep in mind that the main goal here is that you get better at learning how to play jazz, and you therefore also need to spend time actually playing jazz and playing some songs and playing some real music. I think it was Scofield that said in an interview that the people who are good at playing jazz are also the people who are practicing to play jazz. So besides spending time on exercises and arpeggios and chord inversions, then you also really want to spend a lot of time really practicing songs, learning new songs and improvising over them, because you need to find a place in your practice schedule where you're really focusing on putting it all together and really working on making music. And in the end, that's what's gonna make you a better jazz musician. I think it's obvious that if you want to learn a style of music and you want to play like that and sound like that, then it makes very little sense if you don't want to listen to people who play that style of music and sound like that. And I think it's also often underestimated how much you actually learn by just listening to music, and how much you're building up. Because when you're practicing, then you have to worry about, am I phrasing this the right way? Does it sound the right way? And that's where you need all the hours you've spent listening to that kind of music. So if you want to learn how to play jazz, then it is really important that you also figure out what kinds of jazz you really like, and then listen to that. Know all the records, know who the important artists are, check it out. And actually you also want to learn a little bit of jazz history, so you know where they came from and also where it went from there. In that way, I think it's actually really strange that listening to jazz is even on this list. But at the same time, jazz is very often also just considered maybe more of a skill than a real style of music, and people want to be able to play something, and when it's complicated they want to say, I play this and this, but it's jazz inspired. And in that way they want to learn jazz, and they say they want to learn jazz, but they don't really want to learn jazz. There is especially one genre of music where they come with this all the time. I'm not going to mention that genre. If you're not actually interested in learning how to play bebop, it's maybe more useful to figure out exactly what it is you want to learn and then focus on that, because then it's probably going to be a specific skill that you can actually get into your playing in a much more efficient way than trying to learn a genre of music that you're not really interested in. You need vocabulary to sound like jazz, so it's important that you work on putting all the different things that you're working on together to get it to sound like jazz. So not only do you need to know your arpeggios or your scales and your chromatic enclosures and the right rhythms and the right types of phrasing, you also need to be able to put it together when you're soloing and get it to sound like a jazz solo. And I'm not really just talking about checking out some solos and stealing phrases from that or playing a bunch of licks all the time. I'm really talking about the ability to improvise lines that actually sound like jazz. If you have problems with your vocabulary, then that's where you're playing solos and you're maybe playing the right notes, but it still doesn't really sound like jazz. And this is something that we have to study as well. I think some of the most useful ways to study this and efficient ways to study it is that we check out solos by ear. Because if you're doing this, then you have to spend so much time listening for what notes are being played and how to play them and getting to play them, that you're also going to take over some of the phrasing and you're also going to learn some of the rhythms. But there are also other ways that you can work on this. You can also take phrases that you like and then try to come up with other phrases and spend a lot of time composing your own material and then try to be critical about whether it actually sounds like jazz. It's very important that you work on the right kind of technical exercises and the right skills so that you can play the solos that sound the way that you want them to sound. And when it comes to jazz, there are actually a few things that are different from how we are usually taught guitar in the beginning. I think the most important one is probably when it comes to the arpeggios. So usually when you're taught arpeggios on guitar in the beginning, then you're taught a position like this. But that's never really appearing as a melody in a jazz solo. So it makes sense to really work on playing the arpeggios that you do come across. And if you're learning solos and if you're analyzing solos, then you're probably seeing D minor 7 arpeggios played much more like this, or maybe like this. And in that way, that's what you want to practice. Those are the kind of things that you want to work with. And again, similar to what I talked about with modes, it's really important that you work on tying things together already when you're doing exercises. And that means playing arpeggios and triads and stuff like that in the scale, really tying it all together, because when you're improvising, you're not just playing the arpeggio, you're making a melody using the arpeggio and the scale. Another thing that's really important to keep in mind when you're choosing how you practice technique and work on your ability to just play the instrument is that you're working on being able to improvise. So it makes a lot of sense to work on being flexible, and that means not practicing the same thing really a lot, but really working on different exercises and always changing things and building your ability to play different things that you come up with. If you think I missed something important that's holding a lot of people back, then do leave a comment on this video. I think that's a really interesting discussion to have in there. And if you want to check out some more info on how you should approach learning jazz, then check out this video, which is called 10 Commandments of Learning Jazz Guitar.